Ladies and gentlemen, James Lane here, and on the 65th episode of the American Reveille Podcast, we're going to talk all about the upcoming Time magazine article where the left basically admits that there was a secret cabal of evil people conspiring against Donald Trump and all of his supporters. Yes, folks, the left won that battle, and as they said a few months ago, the victors write history, and this is a perfect example of the left rewriting the narrative. We're going to go through this. We're going to deep dive this. It's a long one, all right? We're going to go through it paragraph by paragraph. We're going to talk about it. We're going to explain it, and you're going to see just how sick and twisted and utterly, ridiculously out of their minds the left have become. Stay tuned. Ladies and gentlemen, James Lane here. How you guys doing today? This is the 65th episode of the American Reveille Podcast, and we are looking at this Time magazine article that's about to be printed. And folks, the left are such a bunch of just pretentious pricks, just better than you elitists, that they not only are hijacking history and writing the narrative, but they're painting a false picture of what actually happened while using factual information. That's right. In this article, The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election, in this article, they literally admit to most of the stuff that we've been telling the world the left has been doing, except they say that it was done out of necessity to save the world from the evils of Donald Trump. And this pretty much, excuses them from any penalty. This is absolute insanity, folks. Absolute insanity. And it's not written by just some random person. This is by Mailin Voting. And if you don't know who Mailin Voting is Nancy Pelosi's biographer. That's right. She wrote the biography of Nancy Pelosi, How to Cheat the American People Out of Wealth and Line My Pocket with Hundreds of Millions of Dollars in 3 Easy Steps. No, that's not the name of it, but if I was writing that book for Nancy Pelosi, that's what I would call it. For those listening, there's a pretty picture here. It's actually a horrifying picture. For those watching, you can just look for yourself. So I don't know what to tell you. But for those listening, those folks out there, we have a light baby blue backdrop with Donald Trump large and in charge up at the top left, with lightning and thunder behind him, the QAnon people surrounding him, Confederate flags. He looks very ominous. And to the right, you have somebody holding a Joe Biden sign next to the Capitol building, and sunshine coming out behind it. And all of these people, it kind of goes like a little tunnel, woof, to the left and to the right, like a snake, right? You have all these different people protesting their different causes for their social justice, and they look like heroes, and they hold Biden for president signs, and they look like they're cheering Biden. It's basically a psychological ploy in a painting that is made to have you feel as if the people surrounding Joe Biden defeated the evil right-wing devils and their evil leader, Donald J. Trump, 45th president of the United States. I know you know. I just like to say it because when leftists hear this show, it pisses them off when I call him President Trump. But guess what? You get to call him President Trump forever. By Mailin Voting. This came out February 4th, ladies and gentlemen. The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election. I'm not kidding, folks. They literally talk about like shadow cabals. They literally talk about it. They mention it. They bring it all up. All the stuff. You'll see. You will see, and it's absolutely ridiculous. So I'm going to let you know up front. For those who haven't put two and two together yet, this is written by Molly Ball, a leftist, super leftist, in Time magazine, the magazine of the leftists, okay? The ones that worship the Obamas, right? This article paints all of those bad things that happen, those illegal things that happen, and we're going to point them out, all right? Probably get a little riled up. All those things, this article paints them as a good thing, as just something that had to be done to protect the country. They paint themselves as heroes, and it's going to piss you off. So don't get mad at me. Don't be like, why are you saying this, James? That don't make sense. It's not nice. It's not nice. It's not nice. Listen, I didn't say it would be nice. I said it would be true, okay, folks? And their perspective isn't true, but that's why I'm here, to comment on it and talk some trash and tell you the truth as we go through. All right, folks? So without further ado, thank you so much. Wherever you're watching this or listening to this, please either follow, subscribe, like, share, comment, review, rate, 5-star rating if it's Apple Podcasts. Please, please, please. Folks, let's read. A weird thing happened right after November 3rd election. Nothing. The nation was braced for chaos. Liberal groups had vowed to take to the streets, planning hundreds of protests across the country. Right-wing militias were girding for battle. In a poll before the election day, 75% of Americans voiced concern about violence. See where it's saying right-wing militias were girding for battle? They mention nothing of the left-wing militias and the left-wing attackers that just basically burned cities and harassed citizens for months and months and months, and you'll see that bias in this article. Instead, an eerie quiet descended as President Trump refused to concede. The response was not mass action, but crickets. When media organizations called the race for Joe Biden on November 7th, jubilation broke out as people thronged cities across the U.S. to celebrate the democratic process that resulted in Trump's ouster. Remember when they were telling us all to not be out in crowds and the left was shaming all of the people on the right that were going to Trump rallies for COVID-19 violations, and then all of a sudden a bunch of left-wing people decided to crowd the streets to cheer for their own demise, basically. So I'm not even going to play this video. You've seen it before. We don't need to watch it. A second odd thing happened amid Trump's attempts to reverse the result. Corporate America turned on him. And we did see that. It is true. We saw all the folks that were backing Trump turn on Trump to support the socialism, ladies and gentlemen. Hundreds of major business leaders, many of whom had backed Trump's candidacy and supported his policies, called on him to concede to the president. Something felt amiss. It was all very, very strange, Trump said on December 2nd, within days after the election. We witnessed an orchestrated effort to anoint the winner, even while many key states were still being counted. In a way, Trump was right. Did you hear that, folks? It's Time magazine. All right, that's Pelosi's biographer, spokesperson of the left. In a way, Trump was right. There was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes, one that both curtailed the protests and coordinated the resistance from CEOs. Both surprises were the result of an informal alliance between left-wing activists and business titans. The pact was formalized in a terse, little-noticed joint statement of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and afl-cio published on Election Day. Both sides would come to see it as a sort of implicit bargain, inspired by the summer's massive, sometimes destructive, racial justice protests, in which the forces of labor came together with the forces of capital to keep the peace and oppose Trump's assault on democracy. Okay, first off, there was no forces of labor. The people that were out in the streets rioting, the rioters, these were not people with jobs. These were not the labor force. These were dumbasses. You were dumb asses. The people burning down cities, really the people that made CHOP or Chaz in Seattle, burned and raped and murdered. Yeah, those were the labor force. If you are a hardworking American, a white knuckle, blue collar, hardworking American, whether you're a technician, whether you work in the oil fields, whether you're a truck driver, whether you work in fast food or retail, whatever you are, if you're a hardworking American, that should offend you. Ladies and gentlemen, it should offend you. Plain and simple. Listen, the reason why there is a bond between social activists and corporate bigwigs comes down to the missing puzzle piece that I've been shouting from the mountaintops for months, all right? Whether you want to believe me or not, I do have some business credentials. If you really want to know, you can look it up or ask me about it. But folks, corporate social responsibility is the glue that holds these so-called social activists, these rioters, these evil groups together with big business, with CEOs. All right. Businesses actually spend money on and do everything in their power to invest in social opportunities in their locality and around the country, even around the world, to raise their social credibility, their social score, as you may put, with normal people, people that would buy their products, people that would go, hey, I identify with this movement and therefore I identify with this company supporting this movement. CSR is the key. If there's anybody looking to figure out how to bring this to a halt and reverse this craziness, somebody smarter than me out there, and they're trying to figure out where to look, focus your attention on corporate social responsibility, folks. Trump never assaulted democracy. All right? Trump was betrayed. Trump was making things back to the way they needed to be again, back when things were booming in this country, back when every individual had the right to pursue their own happiness, their own American dream. It didn't matter where you started from, but you at least could fight. You could fight to get somewhere special in this country. Biden and the left and the Democrats, they don't want that. They want complicit foot soldiers. They want people they can control. They want to tell you what's best. They want the collective. That's what they've done with schools, with Common Core, with the programming of our children, the programming of our students, the programming of our society, ladies and gentlemen. The programming of our society. Let's keep reading, all right? The handshake between business and labor was just one component of a vast cross-partisan campaign to protect the election. So instead of violate the election, they say protect the election. An extraordinary shadow effort, red flag, dedicated not to winning the vote, but to ensuring it would be free, fair, credible, and uncorrupted. All right, that's what they say. All right. But they believe that the rules that are in place are wrong. This is how they're going to fold it. They're going to fold the truth into this. They're going to say that the rules are wrong and the new rules that they put in place make it better. All right. So they believe it's free and fair and that Biden won because they changed the rules and screwed with the system. All right. That's a big part of this. All right. Yeah, you're going to have to hear this and see this to believe it. All right. It's absolutely insane. For more than a year, a loosely organized coalition of operatives scrambled to shore up America's institutions as they came under simultaneous attack from a remorseless pandemic and an autocratically inclined president. See, that didn't happen. All right. The pandemic was inflated. We know it was inflated. It's not there. It's a real pandemic. All right. It came out of Wuhan, China. We know about the labs. But what I'm getting at is they made it worse and took advantage of it. All right. So through this pandemic that they inflated for their benefit, and President Trump and his policies that made it easier for mom and pop, for the smaller businesses to compete, which big businesses, they did not like. The left had to go in. These operatives, this coalition had to go in and shore up. That's what it says, shore up America's institutions. It's not that they came under attack. They just didn't think that you and I should have a chance at success. They have enough problems making their millions. They have enough problems making their billions. They don't need you coming into the market and stinking the place up and making them poorer. They like their Tuesday mani-pedi at the pool house, ladies and gentlemen, and they don't want your white trash ass sitting next to them sipping a margarita at the Casa Cabana, playing golf on a Wednesday or whatever, folks. These are shitty people. All right, pardon my language. They really are, though. They really, really are. What kind of, think of this. These are the people, like even in your family, you're going to find people that are on the left that believe this garbage, and they're going to look at you and be like, see, it's so good that we cheated and changed the rules, because if we wouldn't have done that, things would have been so much worse. Hooray, bad, crappy lefties. Like, that's the word. That is the word of the day, ladies and gentlemen. Because that's the literal, emotional, and guttural response to the lunacy, the idiocy, the psychoticness of what has happened here. Ladies and gentlemen, this twisting of the truth, like con artists, like a circus of con men, have taken over all institutions of government. Though much of this activity took place on the left, it was separate from the Biden campaign, and crossed ideological lines, with crucial contributions by nonpartisan and conservative actors. The scenario the shadow campaigners were desperate to stop was not a Trump victory. It was an election so calamitous that no result could be discerned at all. A failure of the central act of democratic self-governance that had been a hallmark of America since its founding. So they're saying if they would have let Trump win naturally, like he was supposed to do, there would have been a calamity. There would have been an uprising on the left. Something insane could have happened that could have unwoven, undone, torn apart the fabric of this very country. But it's okay. A-okay. If I do this, do I get in trouble? If I go A-okay? Even if I say it, right? A-okay. Are they going to say I'm a supremacist for this? It's A-okay, ladies and gentlemen. It's A-okay because the left came to the rescue. They came to the rescue by destroying the integrity of the 2020 U.S. presidential election and many, if not most, of the state elections across the country. Absolute psychoticness, folks. Absolute psychoticness. Their work touched every aspect of this election. I'm reading. They got states to change the voting systems and laws and helped secure hundreds of millions in public and private funding. You see that right there? Their work touched every aspect of the election. I'm not making this up. It's right there. They got states to change voting systems and laws and helped secure hundreds of millions of dollars in public and private funding. Ladies and gentlemen, folks, you could show this. It's right here in the Times. You could go up to one of the brainwashed leftists that you know. This is why it's very important to understand when I tell you there's two different ideologies and we're speaking two different languages. It's very important to understand that they believe this. This is right to them. You are going to go insane when you try to show this now to somebody that you care about, somebody that you love. And you go, see, Look what the left is doing to this country. And they go, God bless them. Thank God they did that. It's going to be so confusing for you, just as it's been for me. Listen, you can't save them all. All right? Two different ideologies. We have to work to put pressure on this ideology and push it back into Pandora's box and bring this country back to balance. All right, ladies and gentlemen? But this should scare you. This is real. This is coming out of the dragon's mouth, ladies and gentlemen, out of the fortune cookie. They fended off voter suppression lawsuits, recruited armies of poll workers, and got millions of people to vote by mail for the first time. Red flag, ding, ding, ding. Millions of people to vote by mail for the first time. They successfully pressured social media companies to take a harder line against disinformation. Let's translate that. They successfully pressured social media companies to take a harder line, i.e., censor anything that they considered negative. And they used data-driven strategies to fight viral smears. They did it with AI, too. Wow, they executed national public awareness campaigns that helped Americans understand how the vote count would unfold over days or weeks, preventing Trump's conspiracy theories and false claims of victory from getting more tractions. What they're talking about there is the narrative that the left kept planting. You remember when I was telling you we know what's going to happen because the left keeps projecting it? That's what they're talking about. We taught the public what was going to happen so that when what actually happened did happen, nobody thought it was real. Boom. Boom. I could say boom like 17 more times. Boom, 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 boom. It's right there, ladies and gentlemen. And again, it's going to feel absolutely insane when they look at you like you're crazy, even though it is in the Time magazine. They executed, all right? They executed these national public awareness campaigns. They brainwashed as many people as they could to not believe what Trump had to say. See, they're not leaving their narrative. They're still saying Trump was full of crap. We know he wasn't. But they're actually saying all the things he said that they were doing. They're doing it right now. They're gaslighting us right in this article. They're gaslighting us right in front of our very eyes, ladies and gentlemen. It's right here. It's right here. That's what I'm saying. You're not going to get this anywhere else. The other guys, the influencers out there, the people, they're going to read some of this. They're going to tell you what they think they're going to get out of here in 10 minutes, but I'm going to give you the whole damn thing. Look at this. Look up there in the corner. We've only gone down a tiny little bit of the bar here. All right, folks, this is going to be a long, long read. So strap it in. Get yourself a Coors Light. Get a PBR. Get a beer. Get a water. I don't know. I don't drink that much, so I have a little bit of amino acids. I'm not going to plug anything because I don't have a sponsorship from them. So we're not going to talk about what I'm drinking. Listen, folks, this is absolutely insane. All right. And you're going to see they're going to get scot-free. They're going to get away scot-free with posting all this out here because all the pertinent parts, they're going to switch the story and say, look how we defended this democracy from the evil of the right, even though they're destroying freedom every step of the way. After Election Day, they monitored every pressure point to ensure that Trump could not overturn the result. Quote, the untold story of the election is that thousands of people of both parties who accomplished the triumph of American democracy at its very foundation, says Norm Eisen, a prominent lawyer and former Obama administration official who recruited Republicans and Democrats to the board of the Voter Protection Program. All right. He's talking about all the people behind the scenes that did everything they could to screw the right from contesting any of the ridiculousness that went on. For Trump and his allies, were running their own campaign to spoil the election. The president spent months insisting that the mail ballots were a Democratic plot and the election would be rigged. His henchmen at the state level sought to block their use, while his lawyers brought dozens of spurious suits to make it more difficult to vote. An intensification of the GOP's legacy of suppressive tactics. Before the election, Trump plotted to block a legitimate vote count, and he spent the months following November 3rd trying to steal the election he'd lost, with lawsuits and conspiracy theories, pressure on state and local officials, and finally summoning his army of supporters to the January 6th rally that ended in deadly violence in the Capitol. That should piss you off. Again, completely ignoring all of the riots over the summer, completely ignoring all of the facts, completely ignoring the fact that they were cheating. They're going to tell you that mail-in votes were safe, even though everybody, even Jimmy Carter's little foundation thingy, sent out the paperwork, the studies, the reality, told the truth that mail-in voting is one of the easiest way to cheat in an election. Really, to really just screw the whole thing up and rig it to hell. Mail-in voting is just where it's at. So this is more misinformation. And that's what this is. This article's there to keep desensitizing the story from the right. We're about to uncover some stuff, in my opinion. I believe that more and more is going to come out. And we're going to start seeing these articles from the left where they're fessing up. But they're fessing up in a light-toned way like this, so that when the real truth comes out, it's soft. Nobody cares. It's already overplayed. This is how they win. They control the media, folks. And he who controls the media is the most powerful, folks. So we have a major wall that we are climbing, a major wall, unfortunately. So this is how they're going to skew it. This is how they're going to paint the narrative, and we are going to keep going through it. The democracy campaigners watched with alarm. Quote, every week we felt like we were in a struggle to try to pull off this election without the country going through a real dangerous moment of unraveling, says former GOP Rep. Zach Wamp, whatever, a Trump supporter who helped coordinate a bipartisan election protection council. Quote, we can look back and say this thing went pretty well, but it was not all clear in September and October that was going to be the case. There's more of these Biden. Look at them. They all look like young, woke students. Fantastic. Absolutely great. People that are going to further destroy the country. This is the inside story of the conspiracy to save the 2020 election based on access to the group's inner workings, never before seen documents and interviews with dozens of those involved from across the political spectrum. It is the story of an unprecedented, creative, and determined campaign whose success also reveals how close the nation came to disaster. Quote, every attempt to interfere with the proper outcome of the election was defeated, says Ian Basson, co-founder of Protect Democracy, a nonpartisan rule of law advocacy group. But it's massively important for the country to understand that it didn't happen accidentally. The system didn't work magically. Democracy is not self-executing. So what they're saying is because the Constitution and democracy was not working in their favor, what they believed, their ideological beliefs told them was the true definition of democracy, right? Of our republic, right? Since it wasn't working that way, they had to help it. They had to give it a boost. They had to do their thing. They had to rig the election, folks. You see, when we say it, they censor us because we're telling the truth. That's what it is. But we're not saying it with the same ideological belief and understanding. And that's why they censor it. That's why they can tell us to our face, we rigged the election. And they don't get censored because when they say it, their version of history, their version of truth, tells them that they are the heroes and that we are the evil. So, folks, only one is going to come out of this in the end. And how we get there, that's a scary thing to think about. It's a scary thing to think about, folks. That's why the participants want the secret history of the 2020 election told. Even though it sounds like a paranoid fever dream, a well-funded cabal of powerful people ranging across industries and ideologies work together behind the scenes to influence perceptions, change the rules and laws, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information. They were not rigging the election, they were fortifying it, and they believe the public needs to understand the system's fragility in order to ensure that democracy in America endures. You see what they're doing here and how they're gaslighting, how they're putting the blame on other things, why they're saying they did it? They're saying, we could have kept this a secret from you, but instead we're going to tell you what happened. We had to influence you. We had to manipulate you. We had to take your freedoms away. We had to lie to you and change the laws and screw you. We had to screw you. We had to lie to you. We had to cheat you because we had to do it to make our country stronger. Don't you see? Don't you see how our Constitution was falling apart? Don't you see the Swiss cheese in our election system? How else could we plug the holes without plugging them with you, America? You. These are sick people, absolutely sick people. The architect, folk, the architect, sometime in the fall of 2019, Mike Podhorzer, that's a name, Podhorzer, became convinced the election was headed for disaster and determined to protect it. And it was headed for disaster. We were going to win. We knew we were going to win at the end of 2019. All right. Before the end, mid 3/4 of the way through 2019, we were confident. Hell yeah, we were confident. All right. So this guy, Podhorzer, became determined to protect the election for the left. This was not his usual purview. For nearly a quarter century, Podhorzer, senior advisor to the president of the afl-cio, the nation's largest union federation, has marshaled the latest tactics and data to help its favored candidates, win elections. Unassuming and professional. He isn't the sort of hair-gelled political strategist who shows up on cable news among Democratic insiders. He's known as the wizard behind some of the biggest advances in political technology in recent decades. A group of liberal strategists he brought together in the early 2000s led to the creation of the Analyst Institute, a secretive firm that applies scientific methods to political campaigns. He was also involved in the founding of Catalyst, the flagship progressive data company. So when the right talks about think tanks that use machine learning to figure out how to win elections, when we talk about these think tanks that use scientific methods and analyzing of research data to come up with ways to mathematically win elections, they're admitting it right there. We are not lying. We've never lied to you. They're saying it exists, but it exists for the good of the people. Just like when they take away your guns and they take away all the money from your bank account and they take away your children, at least mentally, they can say it was for the good of the people. It was for your safety. Come on. Coronavirus 6 pandemic was here. 2031, guys. Come on. Don't screw around. The government might throw you in the New York gulags by that point. You never, ever know. The endless chatter in Washington about political strategy, Podhorzer believes, has little to do with how change really gets made. Quote, "My basic take on politics is that it's all pretty obvious if you don't overthink it or swallow the prevailing frameworks whole," he once wrote. After that, just relentlessly identify your assumptions and challenge them. Podhorzer applies that approach to everything. When he coached his now adult son's little league team in the D.C. suburbs, he trained the boys not to swing at most pitches, a tactic that infuriated both their and their opponents' parents, but won the team a series of championships. They're saying that these are our guys, and this Podhorzer guy, he's an expert at cheating the system through legal tactics, all right? And they even give you a heartwarming example of how they told their kids how to play baseball better, right? They taught their kids how to play Little League and swing more tactically, all right? It's not illegal what he's doing, but it's not having fun either. It's based just to win. Win. So he's just an expert at winning. And he taught his kids how to be winners at a very young age. And there's nothing wrong with being a winner. But the problem is the intent behind this Podhorser gentleman. They believe in an evil ideology. You see where we're coming from, folks? They believe in a ideology that believes that individual pursuit of happiness is evil, demonic, white, nationalist, and racist. If you do not conform to the Borg, you must be eliminated. Ladies and gentlemen, that's why their formula for winning is bad, folks. It is no bueno. It's got to go bad, ladies and gentlemen. So we have a large ideological struggle ahead of us. Trump's election in 2016, credited in part to his unusual strength among the sort of blue-collar white voters who once dominated the afl-cio, prompted Podhorser to question his assumptions about voter behavior. He began circulating weekly number-crunching memos to a small circle of allies and hosting strategy sessions in D.C., but when he began to worry about the election itself, he didn't want to seem paranoid. It was only after months of research that he introduced his concerns in his newsletter in October 2019. The usual tools of data, analytics, and polling would not be sufficient in a situation where the president himself was trying to disrupt the election. So what he's saying is because the president was atypical and he wasn't provided the data, all right, that normal presidents would provide, he had to go through different tactics, different means. He had to throw out the way they were doing it before and secretly find a new way to cheat the American people and President Trump out of the election. We are not prepared for the two most likely outcomes: Trump losing and refusing to concede, and Trump winning the Electoral College despite losing the popular vote by corrupting the voting process in key states. So you see what he's saying there? They admitted before that they changed laws. They just said that they corrupted the voting process in those states. But remember, they're framing it as though they are safeguarding, fortifying, protecting the voting laws by changing them. They are lying to you. They are lying to you. And they just expect most people to be stupid. And unfortunately, a lot of people are. There's going to be people you can't wake up, folks. This is not going to come without damage. It's not going to not hurt our cause, and they know it. But don't worry. Time is what it will take, and time will show proof who will be the victor. This is early. Don't worry just yet. Well, worry. You know, I'm not saying not worry. I'm saying don't fall apart and like go into the fetal position under your bed and like wait for the flash to come. It's not coming. All right, folks, we got a long time ahead fighting this ideological tyranny. All right, a long time ahead exercising our First Amendment rights in peaceful ways to put pressure on our local legislatures. Folks, this is scary. This is bad, but it isn't permanent. Okay, folks? We desperately need to systematically red team this election so we can anticipate and plan for the worst we know will be coming our way, he said. It turned out Podhorser wasn't the only one thinking in these terms. He began to hear from others eager to join forces. The Fight Back Table, a coalition of resistance organizations, had begun scenario planning around the potential for a contested election, gathering liberal activists at the local and national level into what they called the Democracy Defense Coalition. Voting rights and civil rights organizations were raising alarms. A group of former former elected officials was researching emergency powers they feared Trump might exploit. Protect Democracy was assembling a bipartisan election crisis task force. It turned out that once you said it out loud, people agreed, Podhorzer says, and it started building momentum. So they realized in all of this testing that they could manipulate the population, and so they began to do so. And he spent months pondering scenarios, talking to experts. It wasn't hard to find liberals who saw Trump as a dangerous dictator, but Podhorzer was careful to steer clear of hysteria. What he wanted to know was not how American democracy was dying, but how it might be kept alive. The chief difference between the U.S. and countries that lost their grip on democracy, he concluded, that was that America's decentralized election system couldn't be rigged in one fell swoop. That presented an opportunity to shore it up. So where we were trying to shore it up, they are calling it rigging. And where they are saying they shored it up, we are calling it rigging. You see what's happening? So they are putting this out there because this is what they are going to want to be the reality. 100 years from now, if we're all socialist peons, they're going to blast this on the loudspeaker and be like, buy at Walmart, eat processed food. The U.S. government was saved by the Democrats when they shored up the democratic process in the 2020 elections, permanently making sure that an evil Republican could never take over the country again. Carl's Jr. now owns your children. Okay, anyway, that's what I'm talking about. Like, it's craziness. It's craziness. You know, and I know they're twisting the truth. All right. But that's what I'm saying. You're not going to convince people. This is basically for us. This is for us to know that we were right. And it's for them to say that we know, right? They're saying we know that you know what we were doing. We know that you were right. And we're going to say it to the world, and absolutely nothing's going to happen to us. That's how powerful we are. That's what they're saying. They're saying, screw you, peon. Screw you, peasant. Screw you, pleb. Get back in the pit with the shovel where you belong. The Alliance, on March 3rd, Podhorzer drafted a 3-page confidential memo titled Threats to the 2020 Election. So just like we were getting these different PDFs coming out from Devin Nunes and all these other experts on the right, the far left, they were getting all their crazy reports as well from Podhorzer. It sounds like he should have a podcasting hosting service called Podhorzer. Go to podhorzer.com, the most expensive and unreliable podcast hosting service that never delivers what it promises to the American people. Trump has made it clear that this will not be a fair election, and he will reject anything but his own re-election as fake and rigged, he wrote on November 3rd. And should the media report otherwise, he will use the right-wing information system to establish his narrative and incite his supporters to protest. The right-wing information system. You see how they put it? Like it's a terrorist organization. This is the prelude to how they're going to come silence us. They're just going to change the words. They're going to label it. When people get comfortable and calm down and forget that those words mean bad things, they're going to come after us. That is how it works. That's how it's worked historically. Ladies and gentlemen, the memo laid out 4 categories of challenges: attacks on voters, attacks on election administration, attacks on Trump's political opponents, and efforts to reverse the results of the election. Then COVID-19 erupted at the height of the primary election season. Normal methods of voting were no longer safe for voters or the mostly elderly voters who normally staff polling places. But political disagreements intensified by Trump's crusade against mail voting prevented some states from making it easier to vote absentee and for jurisdictions to count those votes in a timely manner. See, that's wrong. Absentee voting was different than the mail-in voting that they're trying to do, which they did. They pulled that off all over the place. No signature requirements, no nothing. just blind mail-in voting, complete BS, complete garbage. And here they're going to say that they had to do it because COVID-19 made it deadly for us to go out and vote. So we had no other choice but to rig the election and make it safe for people. You see, we're the left. We saved your lives by rigging the election. We saved your lives by screwing you out of a good country, a good economy, and freedom to find happiness. We fucked your children out of their future to line our pockets with war and greed. We sold you out to China. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what they did. But political disagreements intensified by Trump's crusade against mail-in voting prevented some states from making it easier to vote absentee. You know, we've all heard the stories. You can watch Mike Lindell's documentary. It's free. It's out there. I like Mike Lindell. He talks a lot. I like him. I feel like the data was very damning. All right. I feel like Mike could have kind of stayed out of the documentary a little. It still would have been a fantastic documentary. No disrespect to Mike. Love your pillows. Love your products. I'm not sponsored by him, so do whatever you want. But I like the dude. So don't hate. Listen, guys. All right. The COVID-19. All right. It erupted at the height of the primary election season. That's what he's saying, okay? It erupted right at the height of the primary election season. This is where we can change what it says, and we can take a look and go, hey, that gave an advantage. These guys were sitting there. Podhorzer was scratching his head going, we have all this data, but we have no excuse to act upon it, right? They couldn't act upon it. Trump was going to win. And then when COVID hit, they found a perfect scapegoat, inflate the deadliness of the disease, scare the shit out of the American people, make everyone take mail-in voting from anything and everyone and anything with a pulse or without a pulse off the planet, on the planet, black, white, purple, indifferent, citizen, non-citizen. If you could put a mark on a piece of paper, you could vote in the 2020 election. That is what happened. That is what screwed much of us. All right? Chaos ensued. Ohio shut down in-person voting for its primary, leading to minuscule turnout. A poll worker shortage in Milwaukee, where Wisconsin's heavily Democratic black population is concentrated, left just 5 open polling places, down from 182. In New York, vote counting took more than a month. Suddenly, the potential for a November meltdown was obvious. In his apartment in the D.C. suburbs, Podhorzer began working from his laptop at a kitchen table, holding back-to-back Zoom meetings for hours a day with his network of contacts across the progressive universe. The labor movement, the institutional left, the Planned Parenthood and Greenpeace, resistance groups, the Indivisible and Move On, progressive data geek strategists, representatives of donors and foundations, state-level grassroots organizers, racial justice activists, and others. Remember last couple months when we were showing you guys meetings from the other, during COVID, where all these folks were getting together and talking about sabotaging things? And the left was like, nope, that's BS. There it is. They're admitting it. Zoom meetings with all these different groups. These are the extremists. These are the different groups of people on the left coming together, putting their differences aside because they hated Donald Trump. That's what they did. Where were we on the right? Where were we? Why didn't we come together? Why weren't there countless Zoom meetings with hundreds of us on the right coming up with our ideas of how to do it? Because we're better, we're more honorable. If you can't think like the bad guys, right? If you can't think like the folks with the opposing view, how do you expect to push back against their views? How do you expect to outsmart them? You have to be able to think like them. There's no other way to defeat them ideologically. All right? I probably said that word wrong, but I'm speaking intensely right now. Loud noises. Anyway, let's get back to reading this. All right, folks? In April Podhorser began hosting a weekly 2.5-hour Zoom. It was structured around a series of rapid-fire 5-minute presentations on everything from which ads were working to messaging to legal strategy. The invitation-only gatherings soon attracted hundreds, creating a rare shared base of knowledge for the fractious progressive movement. Quote, at the risk of talking trash about the left, there's not a lot of good information sharing, says Anat Schenker-Osorio, a close Podhorser friend whose poll-tested messaging guidance shaped the group's approach. Quote, there's a lot of non-invented here syndrome where people, all right, not invented here syndrome, where people won't consider a good idea if they didn't come up with it. All right. So they're discussing now the different ways they figured out how to bring together all these different fractious groups on the left to work together as one big entity, something the right should have been doing. Don't you agree? Don't you agree that if we brought all of our groups together on the right to do the influence game like they did the influence game, maybe we would have had a better chance. All right? Think about that. We saw all the betrayal from those rhinos. We saw so many. It's like 3/4 of the right betrayed Donald Trump. All right? It wasn't just the big corporations. It was the rhinos too. The Republican Party doesn't have this level of organization. They don't have a street team, ladies and gentlemen. They don't have a street team. The meetings became the galactic center for a constellation of operatives across the left who shared overlapping goals but didn't usually work in concert. This is what we've been saying. The group had no name, no leaders, and no hierarchy. Why do you think we can't take them apart? Why do you think we couldn't figure it out and take them down? They aren't actually a group. They're like Fight Club. What's the second rule of Fight Club? You don't speak about Fight Club. What's the first rule of Fight Club? You don't talk about Fight Club. They didn't talk about Fight Club. Congratulations, lefties. You didn't talk about Fight Club. Wow. Pod played a critical behind-the-scenes role in keeping different pieces of the movement's infrastructure and communication and aligned, says Maurice Mitchell, national director of the Working Families Party. Quote, you have the litigation space, the organizing space, the political people just focused on the W, and their strategies aren't always aligned. He allowed the ecosystem to work together better. Folks, we better be learning from this. I'm just letting you know. We better be learning from the left because we're going to need this in 2022. We're going to need this in 2024. If you don't think they're going to screw with the laws and mess our country up to where we're not going to need this to retake the presidency in 2024 and to win the House and the Senate in 2022, you are out of your mind. So if you're too honorable, if you don't have a strong stomach, walk on. I don't know what to tell you. But you're going to have to strap in real tight and screw on a brass set of balls for this, folks, because it's going to get hairier. It really is. It really is. Protecting the election would require an effort of unprecedented scale. As 2020 progressed, it stretched to Congress, Silicon Valley, and the nation's state houses. It drew energy from the summer's racial justice protests, many of whose leaders were a key part of the Liberal Alliance, and eventually it reached across the aisle into the world of Trump's skeptical Republicans, appalled by his attacks on democracy. You see, the folks that hated Trump's attitude, you know, Trump, the guy who brought peace to the Middle East and restored working class families' pride and decency and good wages in this country. You know, all that stuff. The guy that actually was going to bring unity to this country. The people that didn't like the fact that, you know, he didn't have a better mouth on him. Those guys jumped ship. And this is saying that, you know, they created this crazy movement based on a bunch of garbage with their own delusions of grandeur from the left, thinking that they're saving the world. And eventually it bled in and infected those 10, 11 crappy Republicans you always see voting with the left. They might as well just jump ship. It infected everybody. Bill Barr, they're all part of it. They're all part of this, ladies and gentlemen. Securing the vote. So here, now in this section, they're going to literally tell us how they did all of this, all right? Securing the vote, like I just said, how they secured the vote. Just remember, they're gaslighters, so just change this into rigged the election. How They rigged the election. All right. We're going to read. The first task was overhauling America's bulky election infrastructure in the middle of a pandemic. You see that? The pandemic's cover, and they can just do what they want with the infrastructure. For the thousands of local, mostly nonpartisan officials who administer elections, the most urgent need was money. They needed protective equipment like masks, gloves, hand sanitizer. They needed to pay for postcards, letting people know how they could vote absentee, or in some states, to mail ballots to every voter. They just say it so nonchalantly. They needed additional staff. They needed scanners. They needed all these things to process the ballots. In March, activists appealed to Congress to steer COVID relief money to election administration. Led by the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, more than 150 organizations signed a letter to every member of Congress seeking $2 billion in election funding. It was somewhat successful. The CARES Act passed later that month. You see the connection now between the CARES Act and those businesses, those organizations looking for $2 billion in election funding that contained $400 million in grants to state election administrators. But the next tranche of relief funding didn't add up to that number, and it wasn't going to be enough. See, they were using the money, the COVID relief money in these bills like the CARES Act, to fund their rigging, ladies and gentlemen, to fund their rigging. Private philanthropy stepped into the breach. That basically means private citizens, like rich actors, people like Tom Cruise, all these freaking people from the left that came out, the Tom Hankses of the world, and all the other horrible shit of Hollywood that came out to screw over our entire country in favor of their psychotic ideology. They donated a ton of money, and that's what that means, private philanthropy. It stepped into the breach. An assortment of foundations contributed tens of millions in election administration funding. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative chipped in $300 million. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, the same company censoring the masses dropped in $300 million to promote, manipulate, push the direction of the election in a different way than the people using their platform wanted. Man, oh man, oh man. I feel like that just seems and sounds like a conflict of interest. But, Biden's president. Nobody's going to jail. It was a failure at the federal level that 2,500 local election officials were forced to apply for philanthropic grants to fill their needs, says Amber McReynolds, a former Denver election official who heads the nonpartisan national vote at the Home Institute. I don't care about Amber. I don't care about your local election officials needing money. Your local election officials in tons of these states were cheaters. McReynolds' 2-year-old organization became a clearinghouse for a nation struggling to adapt. You see, that's the thing, folks. They'll call them like freedom fighters or something. They'll probably ban this video at some point because I'm saying cheaters, right? But since they bent the rules, they don't consider it cheating, right? We call it rigging. They call it fortifying. They are changing words. They are screwing with definitions. They are messing with English, ladies and gentlemen. That's why it sounds and feels so confusing. We are speaking a different language, folks. All right? So if I call a spade, I'm wrong because my definition of spade is incorrect according to the psychopaths on the left. McReynolds' 2-year-old organization became a clearinghouse for a nation struggling to adapt. The Institute gave secretaries of state from both parties technical advice on everything from which vendors to use to how to locate drop boxes. Local officials are the most trusted sources of election information, but few can afford a press secretary, so the Institute distributed communications toolkits. Do you see what we're talking about? With all that money they got, they literally literally didn't tell the officials to do their bidding, but they armed them with all the tools that they would need to do so, making it easier to distribute. Nothing like that happened on the right. We didn't go into all of our counties and all of the different red places. We didn't send them out stickers and banners and crap all across the country, different information to distribute to the poll workers, the poll watchers, from the poll watchers to the citizens, telling them how to vote, how to absentee vote, what to do. We just figured everybody was smart enough. Apparently in 2020, you got to baby step everybody. So why didn't we do it? We made a major misstep there, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Because we believed it was immoral, it was wrong, it was unethical, and most likely illegal to do because it was coaching voters. But they did it. So while we win and sit here on our moral high horse, Joe Biden signs away the future of our children and grandchildren with a bazillion executive orders from hell. Ladies and gentlemen, local officials are the most trusted sources of election information. Sick to my stomach. In a presentation to Podhorser's group, McReynolds detailed the importance of absentee ballots for shortening lines at polling places and preventing an election crisis. You see, they're covering what they did by saying we stopped violence by cheating in the election. We stopped any problems because we reduced the numbers of people at the polls, because we calmed the crowds through cheating. But that doesn't matter. We calmed the crowds because we did all of this craziness, and because we made illegal changes that just kept people apart and did things in a different way. We stopped a revolution, a made-up revolution that was never going to happen. We stopped violence. We stopped clashes. And you know where those clashes would have come from if Trump was declared the victor on the 3rd? The left would have burned the country to the ground, just like you heard Chief Justice Roberts was talking about weeks or months ago. I don't remember, when they were talking about why they weren't taking up the Trump cases in the Supreme Court, and he said it was to prevent violence. There was some kind of leak about that. Somebody had said something, one of the other justices. They are saying that if they would have let Trump win fair and square, the left would have burnt the country down, and they couldn't have let that happen. So to preserve the nation going forward, they had to do these horrible actions that make them heroes. That's literally what they're saying. If we use our definitions of English and put it to what they're saying, that's what this becomes. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what this becomes. The Institute's work helped 37 states and D.C. bolster mail-in voting, but it wouldn't be worth much if people didn't take advantage. Part of the challenge was logistical. Each state has different rules for when and how ballots should be requested and returned. The Voter Participation Center, which in a normal year would have been deployed, they would have deployed canvassers door to door to get out the vote, instead conducted focus groups in April and May to find out what would get people to vote by mail. Did we have focus groups? Somebody let me know in the comments below. Did we have focus groups to find out if people were going to come to the polls? Like, what was the response supposed to be? Did we do any of that? I'm sure Trump wanted all of that to happen, but it seemed he kept having to fire people for their freaking incompetence or their two-facedness or the fact that they're a rhino, the fact that they were in office. They had infiltrated that post as a fake Republican just to screw Donald Trump because they didn't like him and they didn't like you and me. Absolute filth, absolute disgustingness, ladies and gentlemen. It just boils my blood. It really does. And I know it boils yours too. In August and September, it sent ballot applications to 15 million people in key states, 4.6 million of whom returned them. In mailings and digital ads, the group urged people not to wait for Election Day. All the work we've done for 17 years was to build for this moment of bringing democracy to people's doorsteps, said Tom Lopak, the center's CEO. Do you see that? Do you see what they did there? A campaign of manipulation, but because of how they're framing it, it's perfectly legal, it's perfectly okay, and they're going to be lauded as heroes of history if we don't keep pushing back ideologically, peacefully, using the momentum against them. We have to practice the Tai Chi of the right, ladies and gentlemen, even if we have to invent the Tai Chi of the right, ladies and gentlemen, the right Chi, ladies and gentlemen. The effort had to overcome heightened skepticism in some communities. Many black voters preferred to exercise their franchise in person or didn't trust the mail. National civil rights groups worked with local organizations to get the word out that this was the best way to ensure one's vote was counted. In Philly, for example, advocates distributed voting safety kits containing masks, hand sanitizer, and informational brochures. We had to get the message out that this is safe, reliable, and you can trust it, says Hannah Fried, or whatever the hell her name is, of All Voting is Local. You see what they did there, right? They did whatever they had to do. They said whatever they had to say to people of all different walks of life. All right. It didn't matter whether they were smart enough to figure it out or not. They just assumed that everybody was an idiot and they sent out instructions. You know what they say in sales, right? Ask for the sell, right? Ask for it. Ask for the money. Ask for the buy. Ask for it. Nobody's going to buy your crap unless you ask them to buy it, right? Well, nobody's going to vote for you unless you ask them to vote. And tell them how. Make it even easier. And that's just what the left did. At the same time, Democratic lawyers battled a historic tide of pre-election litigation. The pandemic intensified the party's usual tangling in the courts, but the lawyers noticed something else as well. The litigation brought by the Trump campaign of a piece with the broader campaign to sow doubt, about mail-in voting was making novel claims and using theories no court has ever accepted. You see, that is their key word right there. Theories no court has ever accepted. Not inaccurate, not lies, but theories. They noticed that courts hadn't taken some of those cases before, right? So if they hadn't taken those cases before, then they could frame their attacks on Trump's lawyers in such a way and frame their media attacks, frame all of the different pressures in such a way that may get judges to drop those cases based upon whether or not they should even be in that court, not based upon the actual evidence. Ridiculous stuff. Ridiculous stuff. In the end, nearly half the electorate cast ballots by mail in 2020. Practically a revolution. Red flag word in how people vote. About a quarter voted early in person. Only a quarter of voters cast their ballots the traditional way, in person on Election Day. That means that the left had an overwhelming victory, manipulating the public through fear tactics with the mainstream media, with big tech, with social media, with all of the Hollywood actors, everybody in tune. They got 75% of the country to do something different and screw over Donald Trump, even if they didn't know it, ladies and gentlemen, which brings us to this section right here, the disinformation defense. Now, remember, they're gaslighters, so they're the ones putting out disinformation, right? So this is more like the defense of themselves being discovered as the bad guys, and we're going to go through it right now. Bad actors spreading false information is nothing new. For decades, campaigns have grappled with everything from anonymous calls claiming the election has been rescheduled to flyers spreading nasty smears about the candidates' families. You know, everything the left has been doing for the entire year. The entire 4 years of Trump's presidency, not just during the election. Crazy. But Trump's lies and conspiracy theories, the viral force of social media, and the involvement of foreign meddlers made disinformation a broader, deeper threat to the 2020 vote. It made it a broader, deeper threat to them winning the 2020 election, you mean. That's what that means, right? Not Trump's lies and conspiracies, but Trump revealing the truth about the left. That is what they're fighting. Laura Quinn, a veteran progressive operative who co-founded Catalyst. Remember, they're calling them operatives. They're literally using militant language while calling us militants. That's how big their balls are. That's how out of their minds they are, folks. They began studying this problem a few years ago. She piloted a nameless secret project. When is that okay? When is that legal, right? Which she's never before publicly discussed, that tracked disinformation online and tried to figure out how to combat it. So basically, she tracked all the stuff that was important, all the stuff that wasn't disinformation, but probably stuff that was truthful, and then tried to figure out secretly how to screw them, how to screw everybody that believed in reality, not in the matrix. One component was tracking dangerous lies that might otherwise spread unnoticed. Researchers then provided information to campaigners or the media to track down the sources and expose them. The most important takeaway from Quinn's research, however, was that engaging with toxic content only made it worse. When you get attacked, the instinct is to push back, call it out, and say this isn't true, Quinn says. But the more engagement something gets, the more the platforms boost it. The algorithm reads that as, oh, this is popular. People want more of it. The solution, she concluded, was to pressure platforms to enforce their rules, both by removing content or accounts that spread disinformation by more aggressively policing it in the first place. The platforms have policies against certain type of malign behavior, but they haven't been enforcing them, she says. Now, what she's saying, right, is that she helped get them to use her data to censor people, right? They're choosing what information is true or false based upon guesses, not actual proof. They won't look at our proof. All right. But they don't show any proof, ladies and gentlemen. Where's the proof from the left? Ask a lefty for proof. They'll just call you a racist or a white supremacist. Watch. You'll see. That's what it is, right? So what she's saying is if you can't fight the algorithm, right? If her fighting back with people on the right exposes the right as being correct as well, then the only solution is that these companies have to get rid of people on the right. And that's just what we saw. They're not considering it censorship if they're considering everything hate speech. Blanket, ladies and gentlemen, no, blanket hate speech. Oh, you're white and you're a guy, it's hate speech. I like Taco Bell, hate speech. Oh man, that Taco Bell gave me the shits, hate speech. Listen, folks, no matter what you do, they will paint you as the villain because they want to win. That's how it works in the jungle, ladies and gentlemen. Human nature, right? Human nature. That's how it works, unfortunately. Quinn's research gave ammunition to advocates pushing social media platforms to take a harder line. In November 2019, Mark Zuckerberg invited 9 civil rights leaders to dinner at his home, where they warned him about the danger of the election-related falsehoods that were already spreading unchecked. It took pushing, urging, conversations, brainstorming, all of that to get to a place where we ended up with more rigorous rules and enforcements, said Vanita Gupta, president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, who attended the dinner and also met with Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey and others. I feel like they'll go to these dinners and like Zuckerberg was like looking that way and they just like put a potion into his drink and he drank it. And then they pulled out a pocket watch and they were like, you will censor the American people. And he's drooling and he's like, I will censor the American people. No, these people are jackasses to begin with. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to give you false hope that they were hypnotized by these genies. Listen, Quinn's research gave advocates ammunition, right? We talked about that. We talked about them going to dinner at these crazy people's houses with all these other crazy people doing this crazy racist stuff, because that's what this is at the end of the day. It's crazy racist stuff. By our definition, the left is being racist. Plain and simple. So it's crazy racist stuff. Quote, it was a struggle, but we got to the point where they understood the problem. Was it enough? Probably not. Was it later than we wanted? Yes, but it was really important given the level of official disinformation that they had those rules in place and were tagging things and taking them down. And you know they only did this and they only convinced these people by saying, we'll take down Donald Trump by doing this and then we'll advocate for your industry to have more freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what they did. That is how this works. That's how the chess game's played in the Game of Thrones world that is Washington, D.C. Folks, the more allies you have, the more power you grab. Facebook, Twitter, Dorsey, Zuckerberg, all these different people, they want nothing more than pure, raw, unadulterated power, ladies and gentlemen. Spreading the word beyond bad information, right? Beyond battling the bad information. There was a need to explain a rapidly changing election process, right? There's a need to explain it. So we're changing these laws and we're screwing everything up, right? We're breaking it. We're going to rig the election. So obviously people are getting pissed off. So what the hell are we going to tell them, right? That's what that means. There was a need to explain a rapidly changing election. But why was it changing rapidly? Because we were breaking it. That's why. The left was breaking it using COVID-19 as a guise, plain and simple, and people were getting upset and they had to figure out what the hell to tell them before people revolted. It was crucial for voters to understand that despite what Trump was saying, mail-in votes weren't susceptible to fraud and that it wouldn't be normal. It would be normal if some states weren't finished counting votes on election night. Folks, there are capabilities out there to finish counting votes a lot sooner than they did. And yes, mail-in votes are susceptible. Remember, there are plenty of studies out there that say so. Dick Gephardt. You could do many things with this gentleman's last name right here, Gephardt. We're going to leave it at that. The Democratic former House leader turned high-powered lobbyist spearheaded one of the coalitions. Quote, "We wanted to get a really bipartisan group of former elected officials, cabinet secretaries, military leaders, and so on, aimed mainly at messaging to the public, but also speaking to local officials, Secretary of State, Attorney General, governors, who would be in the eye of the storm, and let them know we wanted to help," says Gephardt, who worked his contacts in the private sector to put $20 million behind the effort. You see that? This wasn't random. This was all planned. How are we going to defeat Donald Trump? We aren't associated with anybody, but we are working in the background, secretly, quietly, in the darkness, in the shadows, to undermine anybody that disagrees with our leftist narrative. Womp. The former GOP congressman worked through the nonpartisan reform group Issue 1 to rally Republicans. Quote, "We thought we should bring some bipartisan element of unity around what constitutes a free and fair election," right? So by getting people from both sides to pretend that they were telling the truth, they made it look like psychologically they were bringing unity to the world. The 22 Democrats and 22 Republicans on the National Council on Election Integrity met on Zoom at least once a week. And they ran ads in, that's an interesting number, 6 states. They made statements, they wrote articles, they alerted local officials to potential problems. We had rabid Trump supporters who agreed to serve on the council based on the idea that this is honest, Womp says. This is going to be just as important, he told them, to convince the liberals when Trump wins. Whichever way it cuts, we're going to stick together. All right, which is garbage, which is BS. You see how they say rabid Trump supporters? This was their campaign to push the people that were Trump supporters off from supporting anything and putting fake Republicans in their place. The Voting Rights Lab and Intra-Action created state-specific memes and graphics. Listen, these are think tanks. They're saying it. They made state-specific memes. These were people, hundreds and thousands of people working in these companies, studying you like guinea pigs. How do we brainwash the people? State-specific memes and graphics spread by email, text, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, urging every vote to be counted. State-specific memes. These were labs. This wasn't just from somebody, right? Like the left voted and they're like, we got this voting thing. We're all hooked into this. Yeah, our vote count, every vote count. That didn't spread by somebody. That spread by an organization, by a company, by a think tank that knew you'd respond to it. And they manipulated you. That's what they're saying. This is how we manipulated you. This is their blueprint. This is how they manipulated you. Plain and simple. Together, they were viewed more than 1 billion times. Protect Democracy's election task force issued reports and held media briefings with high-profile experts across the political spectrum, resulting in widespread coverage of potential election issues and fact-checking of Trump's false claims. So again, for all those that think this is just a bunch of people on the street, this is a movement, right? That's what they're selling. Oh, it's a movement, a left-wing movement, the BLM movement, the George Floyd movement. No, these are boardroom rooms of white-tied old rich people and all of their friggin' do boys and do girls figuring out how they can manipulate you into believing there's a movement, you dumb lefties. There it is, right in front of you. You're brainwashed, so you won't get it. But at least all my friends here on the right will understand what I'm reading to them. And it's absolutely horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. All right? There are no false claims. Trump didn't make false claims. He has a right to question the election because it looked questionable. Plain and simple. He was the president of the United States. He'll always be the 45th president of the United States, and he has the right to question the election based upon credible evidence. No court heard the evidence because no court actually looked at it. Plain and simple. The organization's tracking polls found the message was being heard. The percentage of the public that didn't expect to know the winner on election night gradually rose until by late October it was over 70%. You see that? They're manipulating people into believing that Trump wasn't going to win. Trump, they had confidence Trump was going to win before, and then 70% of people by October were unsure. That's how they use that data to manipulate people. A majority also believed that a prolonged count wasn't a sign of problems. We knew exactly what Trump was going to do. He was going to try to use the fact that Democrats voted by mail and Republicans voted in person to make it look like he was ahead, claim victory, and say the mail-in votes were fraudulent, and try to get them thrown out, says Protect Democracy's Basson. Now, here's the thing. Let me finish with this sentence. Hold on. Setting public expectations ahead of time helped undercut those lies. You remember? They kept putting it out there. That was the media narrative, that the voting by mail. We kept saying it. See, they're projecting. We kept telling you they're projecting in the news, and they're saying it right here. We let you know what was going to happen. We let you know that mail-in votes were safe, even though Trump was going to say that they weren't safe, and they weren't safe. We know they weren't safe. We know that there's hundreds of thousands of possible fraudulent votes that they will not allow us to investigate. We know that things did not roll correctly. Was the election legally certified? Yes. All right. They went through that process. Okay. That's where you're seeing these companies like that sellout crazy freaking news organization Newsmax that wanted to freaking crap all over Lindell. I'm sorry. Newsmax pissed me off. They should, if they really want to make it right, they should fire that jackass that walked off the set, was disrespectful to Mike Lindell. But honestly, that's what they do, ladies and gentlemen. That's what they do. They try to make the perception one thing when it is another. They have board meetings. They have big group discussions. They have companies. They have entire professions out there made at figuring out how to manipulate the masses. So while the masses sat here, thought this was a movement, thought this was something special, thought that people were doing what they had to do on the left to protect democracy, it was suits and ties behind the scene making you move. Dance for me, boy. Dance. That is what these democratic institutions told all of their leftist voters. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not me talking. That is them. That is their handlers. And those are the folks that sold out democracy. There's Amber McReynolds on the left. There is Zach Wamp in the middle. There is Maurice Mitchell on the right. The alliance took a common set of themes from the research Schenker Osorio presented at Podhorzer Zooms. Studies have shown that when people don't think their vote will count or fear casting, it will be a hassle. They're far less likely to participate. All right? Throughout election season, members of Podhorzer's group minimized incidents of voter intimidation and tamped down rising liberal hysteria about Trump's expected refusal to concede. You see what I'm saying? They're saying on their side, they did everything they could to make their side believe that their vote was being counted legally so that they would turn out. All right? Plain and simple. Something that the right should have done more of. They didn't want to amplify false claims by engaging them or put people off voting by suggesting a rigged game. When you say these claims of fraud are spurious, what people hear is fraud, Schenker Osorio says. What we saw in our pre-election research was that anything that reaffirmed Trump's power or cast him as an authoritarian diminished people's desire to vote. You see what we're saying here? So they were able to find ways as well to manipulate all kinds of voter reactions. Just because they don't state it in here, don't think it didn't happen. You saw it with your own eyes. Podhorzer, meanwhile, was warning everyone he knew that the polls were underestimating Trump's support. All right. And that is true. All right. But we thought they didn't realize it, and they did. The data he shared with media organizations who would be calling the election was tremendously useful to understand what was happening as the votes rolled in, according to a member of a major network's political unit who spoke with Podhorzer before Election Day. Most analysts had recognized there would be a blue shift in key battlegrounds, the surge of votes breaking towards Democrats driven by tallies of mail-in votes, but they hadn't comprehended how much better Trump was likely to do on Election Day, being able to document how big the absentee wave would be, and the variance by state was essential. So what they're saying is they underestimated Trump's power. You know, that power that might have done something to the algorithm at a certain time that we're not allowed to talk about, or eventually, you know, we get pulled off the internet, whatever. You know what we're talking about there. Folks, what they're saying, what they're actually putting out is that they knew, all right, through their studies, that mail-in voting would shift the key states in their favor. They knew it. They knew it would manipulate it in their favor. They did it anyway because there was no rule against how they did it. All right. They beat the street. They put their feet on the concrete. They used people power. And that's the name of the next section. People power. All right. They used these situations. They used them as a crutch. They used them as a slingshot to propel them to victory. The legality of that victory. Is it certified? Yes. Is it legal through the U.S. Constitution? Yes. How was it achieved? Was that legal through the Constitution? Probably not. I don't think so. And I know millions, 80 million or so. Yeah. 80 million of us don't believe it was constitutional on how they got to the end result. People power, folks. People power. This is where it gets fun. The racial justice uprising sparked by George Floyd, you know, the African-American gentleman who was having a heart attack and ODing on fentanyl while rightfully so, you know, I will say that knee shouldn't have been on his neck that long. So I'm going to put that blame there too. I have nothing to say about Derek Chauvin, nothing at all. That's good. But at the same time, I will also say that George Floyd was a criminal. All right. George Floyd's a man that put a gun up to a pregnant woman's belly and beat her. I have no respect for him, nor do I care how he passed away. Sorry, not sorry. All right. It was not primarily a political movement. The organizers who helped lead it. All right. The organizers. All right. Who helped lead it wanted to harness its momentum. This is Time Magazine coming from Nancy Pelosi's biographer. All right. This is them rubbing our faces in it, laughing at us, saying this is the truth and there's nothing you can do about it. They're taking credit and they're high-fiving each other right in their cigar smoking rooms and cocktail lounges, folks. The organizers who helped lead it wanted to harness its momentum for the election without allowing it to be co-opted by politicians. See, they tried to keep it separate so that there'd be different forces to fight against Donald Trump. Many of those organizers were part of Podhorzer's network. See? This guy brought all the different forces together. Podhorzer was their glue. From the activists in battleground states who partnered with the Democracy Defense Coalition to organizations with leading roles in the movement for Black lives. The best way to ensure people's voices were heard, they decided, was to protect their ability to vote. We started thinking about a program that would complement the traditional election program area, but also didn't rely on calling the police, said Nalini Stamp, the Working Families Party National Organizing Director. They created a force of election defenders, like those words there, who, unlike traditional poll watchers, were trained in de-escalation techniques. During early voting and on election day, they surrounded lines of voters in urban areas with a joy to the polls effort that turned the act of casting a ballot into a street party. Black organizers also recruited thousands of poll workers to ensure polling places would stay open in their communities. Now, we've all heard the stories, and do you see how they quoted and put the words and used all of the definitions differently? Remember, the Republican Party and Donald Trump got more African-American votes ever, all right, than since the 60s, I believe. Maybe not ever, but it was a huge change for the Republican Party. And there were more that wanted to join over. But remember, there were stories of intimidation. Look how they're putting this. We came up with an idea that had nothing to do, with calling the police. So they had their election defenders who didn't do what traditional poll watchers did. They were trained in de-escalation tactics. Yeah, that's what happened. BS. Those were your strong men in those neighborhoods. Those were your enforcers. Shut up, lefties. This is sickening. It's absolutely sickening. It makes me want to throw up all over. Well, I don't want to throw up all over my mixer here. That's expensive. But it makes me want to throw up. All right? It's gross. It should make you sick to your stomach. That's literally them saying that we use mafia-type enforcement in low-income minority communities to make sure Joe Biden won the election. That's what that paragraph should say. The summer uprising had shown that people power could have a massive impact. Activists began preparing to reprise the demonstrations if Trump tried to steal the election. You see, they're talking about all the violence that they committed, that they're all getting away with scot-free for. Absolute disgustingness. As long as it went for the cause of the left dominating this country and taking the freedoms away from millions of Americans, the violence was absolutely okay. We'll take away Marjorie Taylor Greene from all of her responsibilities from her committees. We'll take that all away and cast her out like a crazy person, but we'll leave an anti-Semite who married her brother and Jew haters like Rashida Tlaib and others in power in their positions, because why not? Lefties, and I'm speaking directly to Jewish people on the left. If you vote for Biden, if you're a Democrat, you hate the Jews. You are not pro-Israel. I'm sorry, not sorry. I'm not going to ever apologize for that. Sorry. You can shun me all you want, ladies and gentlemen. Absolute horror. All right, we're going to just get back to reading this. The summer uprising had shown that people power could have a massive impact, right? Activists began preparing to reprise the demonstrations if Trump tried to steal the election. He didn't try to steal the elections. Quote, Americans plan widespread protests if Trump interferes with the election. They were riots from the left. All before that, Reuters, all right, reported in October, one of many such stories. More than 150 liberal groups, from the Women's March to the Sierra Club to the Color of Change, from Democrats.com to the Democratic Socialists of America, joined the Protect the Results Coalition. The group's now defunct website had a map listing 400 planned post-election demonstrations to be activated via text message as soon as November 4th. How is that not terrorist activity? To stop the coup they feared, the left was ready to flood the streets. Do you see what happened? The left won. The left won the coup. The left successfully enacted the coup. Therefore, they didn't have to flood the streets and convince the American people that the right was holding a coup. Plain and simple. Strange bedfellows. About a week before Election Day, Podhorzer received an unexpected message. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce wanted to talk. You see that? The U.S. Chamber of Commerce wanted to talk with this guy that's organizing all of these hateful groups to get together and overthrow the election. Interesting. That's the government, right? The afl-cio and the chamber have a long history of antagonism, though neither organization is explicitly partisan. The influential business lobby has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into Republican campaigns, just as the nation's unions funnel hundreds of millions to Democrats. On one side is labor, on the other management, locked in an eternal struggle for power and resources. You see, you're giving it away right here. Follow the money. There's the flow of the money. But behind the scenes, the business community was engaged in its own anxious discussions about how the election and its aftermath might unfold. The summer's racial justice protests had sent a signal to business owners, too. The potential for economy-disrupting civil disorder. You see that? That's where they start unveiling why the corporate folks got involved. You see, if the left couldn't handle what was happening and the right being more liable to calm down, basically. People on the right are known to accept what's happening and just go forward, but the left is known to do crazy stuff, as we saw last year. If that would have happened, if we would have had another huge disruption in the country's economy, it wouldn't have been good for big business. If their people are scared to come out and shop in their stores, they didn't want that happening. So what would be best? What would be best to just keep things going and keep the money train going? Plain and simple, regardless of what's right or wrong, regardless of what's best for the country, the Constitution, the freedoms of the people, what is best for big business, for the coffers of Walmart and the coffers of a bazillion other large-scale companies. And what was best was for Biden to win so that the Republicans would shut up and go home and the left would stop burning down their stores and our cities. That is what they thought. That is what they did, with tensions running high. There was a lot of concern about unrest around the election, or a breakdown in our normal way we handle contentious elections, says Neil Bradley, the Chamber's executive vice president and chief policy officer. These worries had led the Chamber to release a pre-election statement with the Business Roundtable, a Washington-based CEOs group, as well as associations of manufacturers, wholesalers, and retailers, calling for patience and confidence as the votes were counted. But Bradley wanted to send a broader, more bipartisan message. He reached out to Podhorzer. This Podhorzer sure knows a lot of freaking people, huh? Podhorzer used this network to rig this election, folks. Even if Biden would have won, it wouldn't have been by as much as he did. It would have been much tinier if these influence campaigns did not take place. Through an intermediary both men declined to name, agreeing that their unlikely alliance would be powerful, they began to discuss a joint statement pledging their organization's shared commitment to a fair and peaceful election. They chose their words carefully and scheduled the statement's release for maximum impact as it was being finalized. Christian leaders signaled their interest in joining further, broadening its reach. You see what they did? They put together a shooting star, a supernova. They took the power of a bazillion small groups and used it as a weapon against the right. Why aren't we doing this? Plain and simple. The statement was released on Election Day under the names of Chamber CEO Thomas Donahue, afl-cio President Richard Trumka, and the heads of the National Association of Evangelicals and the National African American Clergy Network. It's imperative that the election officials be given the space and time to count every vote in accordance with applicable laws. It stated, "We call on the media, the candidates, and the American people to exercise patience with the process and trust in our system, even if it requires more time than usual," the groups added. "Although we may not always agree on desired outcomes up and down the ballot, we are united in our call for the American democratic process to proceed without violence, intimidation, or any other tactic that makes us weaker as a nation." You know that they caused the violence. You know that they caused the intimidation. They were doing it for a year, ladies and gentlemen. They were doing it for a year. And when they're talking about having the space and time, and when they mentioned earlier in the article changing laws, remember, they changed the laws in the key states pretty much so that they could just keep counting these ballots, keep accepting these ballots, keep getting these illegal ballots in late. And they would count no matter what, even without signatures in most places. All right? So what they're saying is we changed the laws illegally, and now we're saying that it's only democratic if you hold everybody to these new illegal laws. So that's why they can get away with skewing the story. They're using half-truths and the manipulation of the English language to screw with you and to paint themselves as superheroes. Folks, give them a round of applause. They saved the country from the evil monster that was Trump, and now socialism can slowly rip our hearts out and shit down our throats. Fantastic. Showing up, standing down. This is crazy. See, there's so much more. Look at that. This is a long one, folks. I told you. And we are coming up almost at the 2-hour mark. Showing up and standing down. Now, obviously, we're getting more irritated and more irritated with the narrative, but it just goes on, and you'll see. It's going to frustrate you even more. Election night began with many Democrats despairing. Trump was running ahead of pre-election polling, winning Florida, Ohio, and Texas easily and keeping Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania too close to call. But Podhorzer, there's that guy again, Podhorzer was unperturbed when I spoke to him that night. The returns were exactly in line with his modeling. He had been warning for weeks that Trump's voters' turnout was surging. As the numbers dribbled out, he could tell that as long as the votes were counted, Trump would lose. The Liberal Alliance gathered for an 11 p.m. Zoom call. Hundreds joined. Many were freaking out. It was really important for me and the team in that moment to help ground people in what we had already known was true. All right, says Angela Peoples, director for the Democracy Defense Coalition. Podhorzer presented data to show the group that victory was in hand. So what he's saying is, don't worry, the manipulation is there. We're not talking about the machine side of it. All right, that's a different story for another day. We can talk about the evidence for that on a different show. But what we are talking about is the huge misinformation and the huge voter manipulation campaign, intimidation campaign that they're practically admitting to it. In this article, they're literally saying, ha ha, we outsmarted you, you dumb redneck right wings, whether you're black, white, purple, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're Asian American, whatever you are, if you're on the right, you're a dumb redneck. That is what the left is telling you here. This article is literally saying this is what we did to bully people into doing what they wanted, doing what we wanted them to do. And we're going to do it under the guise of saving this country from what the people wanted. Plain and simple. You are too stupid to know what's best for yourself, so we will not allow you to re-elect Donald Trump. That's what he got to reassure his people in. While he was talking, Fox News surprised everyone by calling Arizona for Biden. The public awareness campaign had worked. TV anchors were bending over backwards to counsel caution and frame the vote count accurately. You see that? They say frame the vote count accurately, but they say the public awareness campaign had worked. This manipulation had worked to get them to believe in what we believe is accuracy. The question then became what to do next. The conversation that followed was a difficult one, led by the activists charged with the protest strategy. We wanted to be mindful. The protest strategy, see this? The rioting strategy, that's what they should call it. We wanted to be mindful of when was the right time to call for moving masses of people into the street. This was all done like a general was over it, folks. People says this. As much as they were eager to mount a show of strength, mobilizing immediately could backfire and put people at risk. Protests that developed into violent clashes would give Trump a pretext to send in federal agents or troops, as he had over the summer. And rather than elevate Trump's complaints by continuing to fight him, the alliance wanted to send a message that the people had spoken. And that's not what that says. What that's saying is that they know that the governors and the mayors weren't going to use the troops that Trump said, and they didn't want to make Trump look any better. So the violence had to be in places where it didn't matter, like Portland and Seattle and stuff, and some of the other places it wasn't probably their intention. But what they're trying to do is put pressure. You see, they are inciters of violence. They are the ones that should be held as traitors, held as treasonous foes. But instead, they call us the scum of this country if we don't believe in what they believe. And now that they've cheated in every which way possible, and they were legitimately then crowned, right? Because they did certify the election, so that part's legal, so he is the president. They can't leave it alone. They want to destroy the right, all right? They're going to call everything you do racist and white supremacist. Remember, I'll say it again, nothing to do with skin color, folks. Nothing to do whatsoever. People died. People were raped. People were murdered by the left over the summer. Folks, they were murdered. There were people that were in buildings that were lit on fire from lefties, people that are not in jail. But instead, we are being demonized. So the word went out. Stand down, protect the results announced, and it would not be activating the entire national mobilization network today, all right? But remains ready to activate if necessary. So what they're saying is they had so much worse on standby. Remember what we said, if Trump wins, there was going to be chaos. That was the chaos. They're literally telling us right now that they were going to press the button and go kaboom on cities in this country. But that's okay. They won. right? They won. So nobody is going to go to jail. Instead, they're going to write the history like they said they were going to do and make us look like the bad people and make themselves look like heroes that saved the country through their illegal activity. Plain and simple. On Twitter, outraged progressives wondered what was going on. Why wasn't anyone trying to stop Trump's coup? Where were all the protests? Remember, they programmed people to think Trump was performing a coup when we watched the leftist coup take place right in front of our very eyes. Podhorzer credits the activists for their restraint. They had spent so much time getting ready to hit the streets on Wednesday, but they did it. He says Wednesday through Friday, there was not a single Antifa versus Proud Boys incident like everyone was expecting. And when that didn't materialize, I don't think the Trump campaign had a backup plan. You see what I'm saying? They directed their troops to not go in and antagonize people. Plain and simple. Activists reoriented the Protect the Results protests toward a weekend of celebration. Quote, counter their disinfo with our confidence and get ready to celebrate, read the messaging guidance Schrecker Osorio presented to the Liberal Alliance Friday, November 6th. Declare and fortify our win. Vibe, confident, forward-looking, unified, not passive, anxious. The voters, not the candidates, would be the protagonists of the story. And they're talking about the voters on the left. The right, 80 million of us were completely cut out of the American picture from here forward by these monsters. The planned day of celebration happened to coincide with the election being called on November 7th. Activists dancing in the streets of Philadelphia blasted Beyonce over an attempted Trump campaign press conference. The Trumpers' next confab was scheduled for 4 seasons total landscaping outside the city center, which activists believed was not a coincidence. The people of Philadelphia own the streets of Philadelphia. Crows of the working families' parties, Mitchell. We made them look ridiculous by contrasting our joyous celebration of democracy with their clown show. You see, they literally hijack everything. They change the definition of everything. You are listening to this, right? Going, are they out of their minds? Yes, they are out of their minds. And they want you to think that you're out of yours. Plain and simple. That's how the left does it. They are masters of it. They're masters of it. And we have a lot to learn, folks. We have a lot to learn. The votes had been counted. Trump had lost, but the battle wasn't over. Now look what they're going to lay out. The 5 steps to victory. In Podhorzer's presentations, winning the vote was only the first step to winning the election. All right, this is exactly how they did it. Are you ready? After that came winning the count, winning the certification, winning the electoral college, winning the transition. Steps that are normally formalities, but that he knew Trump would see as opportunities for disruption. Nowhere would that be more evident than in Michigan, where Trump's pressure on local Republicans came perilously close to working, and where liberal and conservative pro-democracy forces joined to counter it. You see what they did? When Trump tried to empower the legislatures, the left and these groups with this Podhorzer guy did everything they could to pressure people to not do their job, to not come together, to not represent the people, but instead to represent this power-hungry force for evil. This Podhorzer coalition of scum. It was around 10 p.m. on election night in Detroit when a flurry of texts lit up the phone of Art Reyes III. A busload of Republican election observers had arrived at the TCF Center, where votes were being tallied. They were crowding the vote-counting tables, refusing to wear masks, heckling the mostly black workers. Yeah, right. Reyes, a Flint native who leads the We the People Michigan, was expecting this. For months, conservative groups had been sowing suspicion about urban vote fraud. The language was, they're going to steal the election. There will be fraud in Detroit long before the vote was cast. That's because there's a history of fraud in Detroit. They were expecting it. And they were doing what they were allowed to do. They weren't harassing people the way they say. That's the narrative that they paint to make you think that Trump supporters are racists in the real definition of racism, not in theirs. That's why they're comfortable saying it. Remember, they call you a racist with their own definition of racism. You then believe they're talking about our definition of racism, and then the other people around us believe they're talking about our definition definition of racism. That is where the confusion lies. So what did they do, right? Look, they're trying to see. It says they seek to disrupt the vote count. No, they were trying to see what was happening, ladies and gentlemen. They were trying to see what was happening. He made his way to the arena and sent word to his network. Within 45 minutes, dozens of reinforcements had arrived. Do you hear this language? They've been conditioning you for a year to not find this to be weird or screwed up. Reinforcements. They're talking like terrorists. This is the United States, ladies and gentlemen. This is the United States. As they entered the arena to provide a counterweight to the GOP observers inside, Reyes took down their cell phone numbers and added them to a massive text chain. Racial justice activists from Detroit will breathe, worked alongside suburban women from Femmes for Dems and local elected officials. These are all the radicalized, crazy nutcases on the far left. Screw you guys. You guys are not humans. You guys are out of your minds. You do not promote actual causes to help anybody. You lie. You are liars. You live in an alternate reality, and in the long run, your cause will disappear. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. All right? As they mapped out the steps in the election, certification process. In the election certification process, activists settled on a strategy of foregrounding the people's right to decide, demanding their voices be heard, and calling attention to the racial implications of disenfranchising Black Detroiters. They flooded the Wayne County canvassing board's November 17th certification meeting with on-message testimony. Despite a Trump tweet, the Republican board members certified Detroit's votes, right? And look what they're saying. They flooded the Wayne County canvassing board. All of these different things, right? They're talking about all the things they had to do to pressure people into not doing the right thing. They say they pressured people into doing the right thing, so it justifies their tactics. But the tactics that they use are bullying, illegal tactics. But they can say it because they won. Plain and simple. Election boards were one pressure point. Another was GOP-controlled legislatures, who Trump believed could declare the election void and appoint their own electors. And so the president invited the GOP leaders of Michigan's legislature, House Speaker Lee Chatfield and Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey, to Washington on November 20. It was a perilous moment. If Chatfield and Shirkey agreed to do Trump's bidding, Republicans in other states might be similarly bullied. Do you see what we're saying, what they're saying? So if what Trump was trying to do was illegal and not the right thing, Trump would have been impeached then and would have been in jail. All right. But that didn't happen. All right. He's being impeached for sham stuff. And I don't even think he can be impeached because he's not the sitting president anymore. But it says before this, right? It says before this that he was inviting the legislatures to the White House to try to get them to do his bidding. He believed that they could declare this, right? That's what they're saying. Trump believed this could happen. They're implying that it's not possible, that it's illegal. But then in the next paragraph, they're saying if Shirkey and Chatfield agreed to do it, then it could spread to other states. So they were on a mission to make sure that they couldn't do this, so that the legislatures wouldn't use their power. They had to stop this so that other legislators didn't use their power. They're lying. That's a lot. They're basically putting it right in there. They're BSing us right in front of our eyes. BSing us. This whole thing is BS, right? But normally it's kind of straightforward. That's right there. That's straight misinformation, folks. Straight misinformation. I'm sorry. I've been trying to read this thing this whole time with a straight face and give it to you straight, but man, God, it just makes me want to freaking, because it's just such garbage. And low information left-wing voters are going to eat this up, and they're going to divide us even more in this country. Mark my words. Mark my words. Election boards were one pressure point. Another was GOP-controlled legislatures. The GOP controlled the legislatures and had the power to do the will of the people. That's what the legislatures are for. They're people that are they're elected to represent the people. Plain and simple. That's what they do. All right. But they're saying on the left that that isn't what they do, that they don't know what's best for them. We do. The left knows what's best for you. So sit down and shut up. Sit down and shut up. The democracy defenders launched a full court press. Protect democracy's local contacts researched the lawmakers' personal and political motives. Issue 1 ran television ads in Lansing. The Chamber's Bradley kept close tabs on the process. Wamp, the former Republican congressman, called his former colleague Mike Rogers, who wrote an op-ed for the Detroit newspapers, urging officials to honor the will of the voters. 3 former Michigan governors, Republicans John Engler, Rick Snyder, and Democrat Jennifer Granholm, jointly called for Michigan's electoral votes to be cast free of pressure from the White House. Engler, a former head of the Business Roundtable, made phone calls to influential donors and fellow GOP elder statesmen who could press the lawmakers privately. You see what they're saying? They're telling you that behind the scenes, they took powerful people and bullied the legislatures into doing what Joe Biden and the Democrats wanted them to do. They're saying Trump was the bully, but they're gaslighting us. They are admitting to being a bully. The pro-democracy forces were up against a Trumpified Michigan GOP controlled by allies of Ronna McDaniel, the Republican National Committee chair, and Betsy DeVos, the former education secretary and a member of billionaire family of GOP donors. On a call with his team on November 18th, Bassin vented that his side's pressure was no match for what Trump could offer. Of course, he's going to try to offer them something, Bassin recalls thinking. Head of the Space Force, ambassador to wherever. We can't compete with that by offering carrots. We need a stick. You see what they're saying? They're saying Trump could tell the people on the right, the people that needed to do the right thing, he could offer them something substantial. And this Bassin guy was worried that they would have nothing to sway people to do the wrong thing with. If Trump were to offer something in exchange for a personal favor, that would likely constitute bribery, Bassin reasoned. He phoned Rich Primus, a law professor at the University of Michigan, to see if Primus agreed and would make the argument publicly. Primus said he thought the meeting itself was inappropriate and got to work on an op-ed for Political, warning that the state attorney general, a Democrat, would have no choice but to investigate. You see what they're doing here? They're saying, hey, I called up this guy so he'd put this in the newspaper so that it would influence how people saw what was going on. Don't you see? And they're calling themselves heroes for it. They're saying they saved your country. They saved your country, ladies and gentlemen, by lying to you, by manipulating you, by controlling the media. We saved you. Hallelujah, ladies and gentlemen. Joe Biden, the Democrats, the leftist anarchists, they saved you from yourself, from your own stupidity, because don't you know that if you believe in the American dream, then you're a piece of crap? Come on. Come on, the left is the best. Come over here to the left where we'll give you a bunch of free stuff and steal all of your motivation, innovation, all of your life. We'll steal it right from you, and you can mumble around like a mindless zombie. Ladies and gentlemen, you can mumble around like a mindless zombie. When the piece posted on November 19th, the Attorney General's communications director tweeted it. Protect democracy soon got word that the lawmakers plan to bring lawyers to the meeting with Trump the next day. You see that? They knew about it ahead of time. They knew what was happening. They needed a stick. Reyes activists scanned flight schedules and flocked to the airports on both ends of Shirky's journey to D.C. to underscore that the lawmakers were being scrutinized. After the meeting, the pair announced that they'd pressed the president to deliver COVID relief for their constituents and informed him they saw no role in the election process. Then they went for a drink at the Trump Hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue. A street artist projected their images onto the outside of the building along with the words, "The world is watching." It's bullying. It's a pressure campaign. It doesn't matter if it's true or not true or what they're believing. They're literally pressing people through threats. That is a threat. That is intimidation. That scares people. But it's okay when the left does it. The left one last step. That left one last step. The state canvassing board, made up of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. One Republican, a Trumper employed by the DeVos family political nonprofit, was not expected to vote for certification. The other Republican on the board was a little-known lawyer named Aaron Van Langenveld. He sent no signals about what he planned to do, leaving everyone on edge. All right. When the meeting began, Raya's activists flooded the live stream and filled Twitter with their hashtag, all eyes on me. A board accustomed to attendance in the single digits suddenly faced an audience of thousands. In hours of testimony, the activists emphasized their messages of respecting voters' wishes and affirming democracy rather than scolding the officials. Langeveld quickly signaled she would follow precedent. The vote was 3-0 to certify. The other Republican abstained, of course. So normally it would be a private process, but instead the live stream was flooded with thousands of people who threatened these people. It's so frustrating to watch. They go, oh, these messages of respecting people's wishes. We gave them these loving kind of, we'll give you hugs. Just do the right thing for the left. No, they didn't. They threatened them. They called them racist. They doxed people. They came to people's houses. They threatened their children, but they're not going to put it in this story. You're going to have to dig for those stories. And that is the truth. After that, the dominoes fell. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and the rest of the states certified their electors. Republican officials in Arizona and Georgia stood up to Trump's bullying, and the Electoral College voted on schedule on December 14th. Do you see what they're saying here? They're admitting to their lies. They're admitting to their bullying tactics, but they're saying that that was just good old fun and games, good old strategy, the stuff that needed to be done to save your country. You're welcome. You're welcome. We stole the election fair and square. That brings us to this next section here, how close we came. There was one last milestone on Podhorzer's mind. January 6, on the day Congress would meet to tally the electoral count, Trump summoned his supporters to D.C. for a rally. Much to their surprise, the thousands who answered the call were met by virtually no counter-demonstrators. To preserve safety and ensure they couldn't be blamed for any mayhem, the activist left was strenuously discouraging counter-activity. Podhorzer texted me on the morning of January 6 with a crossed-fingered emoji, even though we know that people from the left did instigate a lot of the problems, though there were extremists from the right that did as well. All right, it was a mixed crowd of jackasses that stormed the Capitol. Now, I'm not talking about the hundreds of thousands of other peaceful Trump supporters that did nothing wrong. Those are good folks. I'm just talking about the small group of people that did the stupid stuff at the Capitol that they shouldn't have done. If they wouldn't have done that, if that didn't happen, if the left and the right extremists that were mixed into that group didn't promote that violence, they would have actually been able to talk about the fraud on during that contestation of the election. We might have actually gotten that audit that we wanted to get, that Ted Cruz was trying to get. But instead, after that, we were doomed. I keep saying that. And obviously they knew it would happen. Plain and simple. Trump addressed the crowd that afternoon, peddling the lie that lawmakers or Vice President Mike Pence could reject states' electoral votes, and they could. They could. Lawmakers have the right. What do you mean that that it's a lie, that they can reject that? Of course. He told them to go to the Capitol and fight like hell, and then he returned to the White House as they sacked the building. No, they started attacking that building like a minute. It was like the minute of the speech ending. All right, like somebody pressed a button and ordered somebody to do something. They would have had to walk like a whole couple miles or however it is. It's I think a 40-minute walk or something to get from there to the Capitol building. So no. Trump did not incite violence whatsoever. He did not incite violence. Plain and simple. Then he returned to the White House. He called the rioters very special. He called for peace, ladies and gentlemen. We know he called for peace. We know they censored him calling for peace, and they manipulated everything. This is where the left is going to say that I'm lying. They're going to say that I'm spewing conspiracy theories, but I'm not. We all watched it before it was censored. We all watched it before Twitter took everything down, before the internet censor Gestapo, the jackboots came cracking across the throats, right? The Derek Chauvin jackboots of the leftist groups came coming across the throats of American people across the country. And that is not a statement based on race, plain and simple. The members of the alliance, all right, came together. All right. It was his final attack on democracy, they're saying. And once again, it failed. By standing down, the democracy campaigners outfoxed their foes. We won by the skin of our teeth. See, they're even saying it. If that violence didn't happen, they might have lost. We won by the skin of our teeth. Honestly, and that's an important point for folks to sit with, says the Democracy Defense Coalition people. There's an impulse for some to say voters decided and democracy won, but it's a mistake to think that this election cycle was a show of strength for democracy. It shows how vulnerable democracy is. And I actually agree with that quote. It shows how vulnerable democracy is because the left's manipulated democracy to win. They manipulated people. There's obviously nothing that makes that illegal, but it's disgusting. Isn't it? The members of the Alliance to Protect the Election have gone their separate ways. The Democracy Defense Coalition has been disbanded, though the fight back table lives on. Protect Democracy and the good government advocates have turned their attention to pressing reforms in Congress. Left-wing activists are pressuring the newly empowered Democrats to remember the voters who put them there, while civil rights groups are on guard against further attacks on voting. Business leaders denounce the January 6 attacks, and some say they will no longer donate to lawmakers who refuse to certify Biden's victory. Podhorzer and his allies are still holding their Zoom strategy sessions, gauging voters' views and developing new messages. And Trump is in Florida, facing his second impeachment, deprived of the Twitter and Facebook accounts he used to push the nation to its breaking point. See, this is them painting the narrative. I know this makes it, I want to yell reading this. I know. And my blood is boiling. I know. But you can't overreact. You have to ask yourselves, right? You have to observe what's happening and you have to go, hey, why don't we have that? Why aren't the Republicans coming up with strategy sessions? You know, they'd call them like hate meetings or something, which is BS. They won't give you any leeway. We are not allowed to win. We are not allowed to talk. We're not allowed to come together in groups. We're not allowed to discuss ideas because God forbid if we ever figure out how to play their game, ladies and gentlemen. Well, start figuring it out. Because this 2-hour plus podcast, I'm literally giving you all of the answers to the test. All right. This is their playbook. Learn from it. As I was reporting, all right, I'm reading from the article. I'm not actually reporting. I'm reading it. As I was reporting this article in November and December, I heard different claims about who should get the credit for thwarting Trump's plot. Liberals argued the role of bottom-up people power shouldn't be overlooked, particularly the contributions of people of color and local grassroots activists. Others stressed the heroism of GOP officials like Van Langeveld and Georgia Secretary of State CCP Brad Raffensperger, who stood up to Trump at considerable cost. The truth is that neither likely could have succeeded without the other. It's astounding how close we came, how fragile all this really is, says Timmer, the former Michigan GOP executive director. It's like when Wile E. Coyote runs off the cliff. If you don't look down, you don't fall. Our democracy only survives if we all believe and don't look down. Democracy won in the end. The will of the people prevailed. For those listening, I'm making faces and putting quotes in the air. But it's crazy in retrospect that this is what it took to put an election on in the United States of America. All right? That is the Times News article that you hear people touching on. That is the 2-hour read that it takes to fully understand this joke, this lie, this gaslighting, this article. This is going to come out in Times Magazine and the whole world's going to see it. And every low information voter, every dummy that doesn't know the truth, every lefty on the planet's going to read it. And after this article comes out from that point forward, this is going to be the history that the left paints of what happened in 2020 until we can regain some power and make the changes that need to be made. So folks, that is the fight we have ahead. That is the ideological struggle. We must become narrative painters ourselves. We must become people who pressure these election laws, these legislatures. We have to get laws changed in our local cities and states. We have to make a difference, lest there is no difference to make at all when they completely we remove our rights, our power, and our authority as the people in this country, the people that are supposed to give power to the Constitution and the government. But as you can see, the Constitution means nothing to the left, and the government is only a pawn for the institutions that pump money through it. And the folks that line their pockets with that money guide that institution, guide this government, guide these powers to the rich investors of the world that buy and sell Democrats and Republicans like little plastic toys, ladies and gentlemen. And that is the problem we are facing. Whew. It's a big one, folks. But I have no doubt that the good, smart, and strong patriots of the United States of America in time can't figure it out. The American Reveille is doing what we can, all right? And I expect you to do what you can as well. Peacefully, of course. With peace and love, my friends. This was a long episode, all right? A long one. If you're still with me, then you obviously like what we do. If you really enjoyed what we did, do me a favor. Go to the website. Sign up for our newsletter. This is www.americanreveille.com. Hit the newsletter. Sign up for it. Do me another favor if you can. Support us, all right? We really could use a little bit of financial assistance as a company. We aren't bringing in profit or income at this point. We're working on some different scenarios because we want to make sure that we take care of the American people, that we work with you guys, that we give you stuff that you need that's valuable, so we're not actually ripping you off or wasting your money. We're looking at all different options, everything done in America, everything made in America. And don't worry, we'll talk more about that other points. You'll see when different things come out, but don't worry, everything we do will always be free and stuff like that. This is other different avenues and opportunities. I'm trying out some different sponsorship products, different things like that, because I'm not going to peddle anything that I don't truly believe in. We're always looking for small businesses, different sponsorship opportunities like that there. Email me directly, JAMESLANE@AmericanReveille.com. But if you can spare a couple dollars you'd like to donate to our cause, please support our company, www.americanreveille.com, and just hit the support us tab. You can find me on Rumble as well, American Reveille on Rumble. That's American_Reveille. I'm also on Odyssey, ODYSEE. You can find me there, odyssey.com @American_Reveille. We are still trying to find social media solutions that go beyond Gab, Cloud Hub, and Telegram, though you can find me on most of those. I'm sure Parler will be back. We're trying to figure out what's going on with that. I'm not really taking a side or a stance. I don't know who to believe with the John Matz and Dan Bongino stuff. I'm sure we'll hear more as time goes by. We have street team things still developing. I'm on my 10th revision with the artist for a more professional logo for some of our corporate things that we're putting together. And I just look forward to building this company with all of you, ladies and gentlemen. I look forward to the national reach that we can have and the influence that we can have on all kinds of folks across this great land to return to better values. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, this deep dive on what the left had been plotting and what they did together with their self-proclaimed cabal of like-minded individuals. Have a great day. Bye.